This is a sub-lecture from our collection of lectures on semantics, pragmatics, conversational discourse and narrative language, particularly focusing on T units. It's essentially a skill class instructive video. Now, T units, as we will see, can be used for measuring clausal density in both narrative language and in conversational discourse. There is some revision that I'll go through about clauses and coordination and subordination as background to calculating T units. So what is a clause? This will be revision, but it never hurts to have it said again, just to clarify. So to define a clause, we are talking about a group of grammatically related words expressing a proposition that must include a subject and a predicate. Now, the subject may be explicit, such as she's training in speech pathology, but it may also be implied, such as training in speech pathology. So if I asked someone what you do, they might say training in speech pathology. So the implicit she or he or Susan, so forth, is the implied subject. The predicate is the portion of the clause that explains or modifies that subject. So to be a predicate, it must contain a finite verb expressing tense, person, or number, such as training in speech pathology is the predicate for the subject here, she, or the implied subject. Conjunctions, again, important when we're thinking about T units. A conjunction is defined as a joining word. They literally join sentence parts together. So some examples below: we went shopping and out for lunch. We could say we went shopping and we went out for lunch with an implied subject we, but the and is joining those two sentences. The next example: I enjoyed the football, although my team did not play. Now, although is a conjunction, what we will talk about in a moment is that and is a coordinating conjunction and although is a subordinating conjunction. So let's look at coordinating conjunctions first of all. Words that join the sentences together where each sentence is of equal weight. So Kath follows North Melbourne, but her husband barracks for Geelong. Or we went to Witchery and to Sportsgirl. So either side of the coordinating conjunction, the but or the and in these examples, have equal weight in terms of the content they're providing. Subordinating conjunctions are where we have a main clause and a dependent clause, where the dependent clause establishes a relationship or is somehow dependent on the main clause. So here are a couple of examples. I enjoyed the football, although my team did not win. Despite the warm weather, he kept his jumper on. So both of the dependent clauses, although my team did not win and despite the warm weather, are dependent on the main clause, which are the other parts of those two examples. So you need to just keep them in mind, subordination and coordination, particularly because T units rely a lot on counting a subordination index or clausal density, which I'll come to. So here's an opportunity for you just to revise and practice that. So in each of these examples, identify the main clause and the subordinate clause, whether it's a dependent or subordinate clause. Some of them may not have a dependent or subordinate clause. So my dog loves swimming in the sea, but he hates being bathed. You need to determine whether the conjunction but is a coordinating or a subordinating clause and what the dependent clause is. You'll only have a dependent clause if there is a subordinating conjunction. So the first example, but, is a coordinating conjunction, so there is no dependent clause. So take a moment to do them, and the next slide gives you the answers. Any queries with those, please don't hesitate to post a question to the news forum. So back to calculating T units and the subordination index, which go hand in hand. We need to do the following. We need to determine how many clauses are in the narrative sample. We need to then calculate how many T units are in the sample. And from those two calculations, the clauses and the T units, we can measure the subordination index, which is a measure of clausal density. The higher the subordination index, SI, the higher the clausal density. So to calculate a T unit, one T unit is a single independent clause and any subordinating clauses that are grammatically attached to it. So an example, the girl did not like water. There is a main or independent clause and that's one T unit. Another example, the girl did not like water although she lived by the sea. Here we have a main or independent clause plus a dependent clause, but it's still one T unit, even though there is a main and a dependent clause. All coordinated clauses are separated into individual T units. So in the example, the girl never liked water and she certainly did not like living in the swamp with her grandfather. If we break that up, we see we have two T units. The first, the girl never liked water. The second, and she certainly did not like living in the swamp with her grandfather, another T unit. The only if is if there is a co-referential subject deletion. The girl did not like water or juice is one T unit. So please just take some time just to think those through, and on the next couple of slides we'll have opportunities to practice that. Sorry about the dog barking. So to calculate the subordination index, which is a measure of clausal density, we count the number of clauses in the entire sample and divide it by the total number of T units in the sample to give us the SI. The higher the score, the greater the clausal density. Keeping in mind that a T unit is a main clause plus or minus any subordinating clauses attached to it. So we can never have more T units than clauses, but we might have the same number, for example. Here are examples. In sample 1, we have 50 main clauses and 50 subordination clauses. So that gives us a total of 100 clauses and 50 T units in the sample. So we have 100 divided by 50, which gives us an SI of 2. In sample 2, we have 50 main clauses and 10 subordinating clauses. So we have 60 clauses in total and a total of 50 T units. So our calculation becomes 60 divided by 50, which gives us a SI of 1.2. So sample 1 has a greater clausal density. So I'd like you now to have an opportunity to calculate T units on this short narrative sample that I'll read to you. My little brother's a real pain in the neck and he's always taking my stuff and he never asks first and then he loses it or breaks it. Whenever I stay at my cousin's house, he always goes on my computer and plays my stuff. And so my mum yells at me when I slug him for it, but sometimes he's not too bad. So I'd like you to separate it into clauses, and just as a hint, there are 10 clauses. Separate those clauses into T units and do an SI calculation. The way that I read it gave some clues as to breaking up the clauses as well. So before you go to the next slide, have a go at separating the clauses and remember you're looking for 10 separate clauses. Okay, so I'm going to assume that you can pause this and I'll show you the next slide where the clauses. So my little brother's a real pain in the neck and he's always taking my stuff and he never asks first and then he loses it or breaks it. Whenever I stay at my cousin's house, he always goes on my computer and plays my stuff and so my mum yells at me when I slug him for it. What we need to do now is to calculate the number of T units, which you'll recall is a main clause plus or minus any subordinating clauses. So there cannot be more than 10, but there may well be less, and there actually are less. There are 6 T units because there are some main clauses that have a dependent clause. So again, if you could just take a moment to work them out, and I'll show you the slide shortly. So let's look at calculating the T unit now. Following breaking it into clauses, how many T units have you calculated? So this is my calculation. Any queries, please don't hesitate to put anything up on the news forum or discuss with each other. So the first T unit, my little brother's a real pain in the neck, independent clause. Second, and he's always taking my stuff, another independent clause. Third, and he never asks first. Fourth, and then he loses it or breaks it. That is an example of the co-referential subject deletion. So we have 1 T unit. So now we're up to 4 T units. Here we have 5, the 5th T unit. This is a long one. Whenever I stay at my cousin's house, he always goes on my computer and plays my stuff. So we have a dependent clause and the independent clause with also the co-referential subject deletion. And the 6th one, and so my mum yells at me when I slug him for it. Independent clause, dependent clause. So we have 10 clauses with 6 T units, which gives a calculation of 1.67.